The Energy and Commerce Committee will be in order, and the chair will recognize himself for an opening statement. But before we begin, I want to take just a moment to extend the condolences of this committee regarding the very tragic events in Japan. Our thoughts and prayers are with the Japanese people in the wake of the worst earthquake in a century, which has stolen the lives of thousands and badly damaged the nation's infrastructure, including some nuclear facilities. There will be no doubt a desire to question what the events in Japan mean for our nation's pursuit of safe, clean nuclear energy, and we will have those conversations in due time. For today, our concern is squarely with the Japanese people and providing whatever assistance that we can to them in this time of tragedy. We do have committee business to attend to, and I will begin with remarks on H.R. 910 and H.J. Res. 37. We're here today to commence consideration of two bills that, while addressing significantly different topics, together exemplify a major reason we were sent here by the voters. With these bills, we are putting the brakes on runaway federal government. There's an old adage that says when you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. Today, America finds itself in an economic hole dug deeper and deeper amid excessive federal spending and costly regulations. If we allow the EPA to ignore the will of Congress and move forward with its global warming regulatory agenda, I believe that the economic hole will only crater further. The Energy Tax Prevention Act is a bill that to stop the digging and prevent further economic harm in the government's hands. Gasoline prices are rapidly heading towards $4 a gallon, levels that were last seen in the summer of 2008. By all accounts, we were headed toward this new price before unrest in Libya and other Middle Eastern countries. A host of regulations, including mountains of federal restrictions on domestic oil drilling and refining, make a bad situation worse by increasing our dependence on imports. Make no mistake, if we allow the EPA to move forward unchecked, its actions will only drive gasoline and other energy prices even higher. Part of EPA's agenda is its proposal to regulate carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions from domestic refiners. These newest GHG regs will apply to both new and existing refineries. At hearings on this bill, EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson was remarkably hazy on what requirements she planned to impose in the final version of the rule. But to suggest that such a policy will not raise the cost of refining oil into gasoline and ultimately at the pump is flat out wrong. We have held a number of hearings on this legislation, and we have heard from a number of job-creating sectors, including domestic refiners. Steve Cummings, Vice President of Lyons Oil Company in Arkansas, echoed concerns raised by other refineries when he said EPA's proposal is already chilling planned expansion projects and that H.R. 10 is also necessary to protect consumers, farmers, and truckers from higher gasoline and diesel prices. We released the bill in discussion draft form back in early February and welcomed all constructive comments. Through that open process, we made several changes and clarifications that improve the bill. Unfortunately, not everyone has been focused on the facts, and from the moment we put forward the proposal, it has been surrounded with misinformation. In one glaring example, critics slammed the bill repealing the new automobile and light truck efficiency standards scheduled to take effect for model years 2012 to 2016. Yet anyone who bothered to read the bill carefully and narrowly crafted at a length of just 9 pages can see that these fuel economy standards are explicitly kept in place. For 2017 and beyond, the bill returns regulation of motor vehicle fuel economy where it has stood since the 70s, with NHTSA, which balances fuel economy with other factors including vehicle cost and safety. Our goal is to give clear responsibility to a single agency, something that President Obama recommended in the State of the Union address. There are a host of reasons to support H.R. 910, but let me put it simply. The bill says stop to an EPA attempting to impose policies that we cannot afford, that will destroy jobs that we cannot afford to lose. By passing the bill, we can put Congress back in charge of setting the energy and environmental policies that will allow our nation to create jobs, bring down prices at the pump, and make America more secure and energy independent. Just as we must stop the EPA from pursuing its runaway regulatory agenda, we must also put a check on the FCC. which is similarly attempting to commander our Internet in unprecedented new regulations. For that reason, I urge my colleagues to support H.J. Res. 37, nullifying the FCC rules regulating the Internet. We have an open and thriving Internet today thanks to our historical hands-off approach. And as I said last week, if it ain't broke, don't break it. The Clean Air Conference rejected the Senate language. Oh, let me conclude by saying this. As I look to my years in the Congress, serving on this powerful committee under Chairman Dingell, Bliley, Tozan, Barton, and Waxman, I wouldn't change my committee assignments for any other. The Energy and Commerce Committee has a long tradition of being the very best at confronting the issues of the day and crafting decent legislation impacting every American family and business. Without these two pieces of legislation that we're marking up beginning today, H.R. 910 and H.J. Res. 37, we are ceding authority to unelected bureaucrats that will make the decisions rather than us. The Clean Air Conference rejected the Senate language, which would have added greenhouse gases to the Clean Air Act. So Congress did speak. It said no, and here we are today trying to stop the EPA from overruling what the Congress said some 20 years ago. Even some of the leading opponents of H.R. 910 are still suggesting that they could support a 2 to 5 year moratorium as an alternative. That reasoning says that we're not ready for the regs now and the job losses and the energy price increases that surely will follow. Each of us were elected to make tough decisions and be accountable. Passing the buck and blaming an agency for harm that will be coming our way is the easy way out. It is not responsible, nor is it accountable. I would urge all of my colleagues on both sides to support both pieces of legislation and yield now 4 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts for Mr. Waxman, who is on his way.
Okay, I thank the Chairman. Today's markup may seem to be an odd coupling. First, a bill to repeal the scientific finding that global warming pollution is dangerous and eliminate EPA's tools to address it, and then a resolution disapproving the open Internet rule promulgated by the FCC last year. But there's a method to the majority's legislative madness. The GOP's version of March Madness this afternoon is designed to make both the polluters and the broadband barons the big winners at the expense of our environment, our health, our economy, and American consumers. In other words, today, House Republicans will take up legislation that would destroy the World Wide Web, and they'll also bring up a bill that will help destroy the whole wide world itself. They'll take aim at Google Earth and set their sights on Mother Earth. They'll slow down the blogosphere and pollute the atmosphere. They'll clog up the Internet and smog up the air from smokestacks belching massive amounts of dangerous global warming pollution. Preserving the open Internet and protecting our environment and human health should be our priority. Instead, these two unwise and ill-conceived pieces of legislation would take us in the opposite direction. The Upton-Inhofe bill overturns the scientific finding that pollution is harming our people and our planet. It ties EPA's hands, preventing it from being able to take steps to curb the harms this pollution will inflict on our health, environment, and national security. The Republican resolution to repeal the FCC's open Internet order isn't just a solution in search of a problem, it's a resolution in search of a problem. Consumers rely on it. Major carriers like AT&T and Comcast have no problem with it. Innovators and our economy depend on it, but yet the Republicans want to repeal it. This makes no sense. Despite the difference in substance, it's altogether fitting that the committee is considering the bill and the resolution together today, since they're both headed to legislative oblivion. I urge opposition, and I yield back the balance of my time with the hope that we can defeat these ill-conceived notions.
Gentleman yields back the time. Would recognize for an opening statement the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Pitts, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this markup today. I support both pieces of legislation. I'd like to make some comments regarding H.R. 910. Our top concern in this Congress is jobs and economic growth. Rising prices for energy and gasoline threaten an already weak recovery. What we are doing today is telling the EPA to stop their efforts to make energy even more expensive. The President says he is concerned about rising gas prices, but how concerned can he be when the actions of his own administration would artificially increase prices over the coming years? Stable and low prices for energy help businesses plan for the future. With a stable and low price, American families stay on their budget. Stable and low prices help farmers in my district grow the food to feed the nation. The EPA plan is for increased taxes and regulation that will drive up energy prices. We're focused on growing jobs, not through government taxing and spending, but by unleashing the ingenuity and the creativity of the American people. A vote for H.R. 910 is a vote for the American worker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chairman yields back. Chair would recognize the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Chakowski, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today we're considering two bills that undermine public safety and well-being. While I strongly support the Obama administration's net neutrality rule and oppose H.J. Res. 37, I would like to focus now on H.R. 910, a bill that would revoke EPA's authority to regulate greenhouse gases. Mr. Chairman, the science is clear. Global warming is real and human activity is a principal contributor. Today, by pushing H.R. 910 through our committee, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are waging war on science and putting the health and security and, yes, the good jobs in clean energy technologies and production of every American in jeopardy by ignoring the dangerous threat that climate change poses. Already, we're seeing this threat become a reality. The 10 warmest years on record have been between 1990 and 2010, the hottest year ever. This year, we've witnessed drastic changes in temperature and have seen in recent years that hurricanes are more severe, water levels are rising, droughts are becoming longer, and mountain glaciers are receding around the world. After the Bush administration ignored climate change for almost a decade, the Obama administration is finally taking steps to regulate greenhouse gases. Instead of embracing this historic moment, our committee is marking up H.R. 910, which would eliminate EPA's authority to finalize this important regulation. We should not allow this misguided legislation to move forward. 18 leading scientific organizations agree that, quote, if we are to avoid the most severe impacts of climate change, emissions from greenhouse gases must be reduced dramatically. Like many of my colleagues on this panel, I'm a grandparent who worries about the future of my grandchildren. Passage of H.R. 910 will mean that more kids will suffer from asthma. Thousands of people will die each year unnecessarily from exposure to toxic pollutants. And everyone will live on a planet dangerously different from the one we know today. I strongly urge my colleagues to oppose H.R. 910. Yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Would yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Terry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this markup today on H.R. 910 and H.J. Resolution 37. I'm pleased that we're moving both of these. With regards to H.R. 910, the consequences of not enacting this legislation are severe. The American Council for Capital Formation has estimated that EPA's greenhouse gas regulations could reduce business investment between $97 and $290 billion in 2011, and as much as $309 billion in 2014. When you reduce business investment, you kill jobs and job creation. And we have heard from refiners that refining costs will go up under these regulations, increasing the price at the pump for all Americans. Maybe that's what their goal is. With regards to the other bill before us, Resolution 37, a resolution disapproving the FCC rules On the Internet, I must again say that we have an open and thriving Internet today thanks to our historical hands-off deregulatory approach. This resolution will help us keep it that way. I don't buy into the reasoning that you need regulation to prevent regulating the Internet. Makes no sense. This burdensome regulatory overreach will stifle investment and have a devastating effect on our economy at a time when we can least afford it. According to one of our witnesses at a recent hearing, she stated that, quote, the rule's potential to destroy the ability of infrastructure providers to raise capital would threaten the infrastructure on which both consumers and content providers rely. Mr. Chairman, I urge all of our committee members to support both of these bills, and I yield back my time.
Chairman yields back. Would yield 2 minutes for an opening statement to the gentlelady from Wisconsin, Ms. Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent to be yielded 4 minutes.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm really disappointed that we are holding a markup on these two flawed bills. It's a shame that the majority continues to focus on efforts that put our nation in jeopardy rather than on jobs, economic growth, and opportunity for all Americans. Mr. Chairman, at Friday's EPA budget hearing, we heard testimony from EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson. She took time to express her strong concerns about your Energy Tax Prevention Act, saying that, quote, the most extreme parts of the bill remain unchanged. End quote. Since her initial testimony on the measure, she said, I quote, it still would presume to overrule the scientific community on scientific finding that carbon pollution endangers Americans' health and well-being. But she continued, and her words were gripping, quote, politicians overruling scientists on a scientific question. You might well be remembered more for that than anything else you do. Think about her words for a moment. Today, you are setting a precedent that scientific findings can be ignored in the name of politics. The administrator of the EPA, the agency whose mission it is to protect human health and the environment, is telling this committee that the bill we are considering today will gut the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act, supported by Democrats and Republicans alike, is critical to saving millions of American children and adults from debilitating and expensive illnesses that occur when smokestacks and tailpipes release unregulated, unrestricted amounts of harmful pollution into the air that we breathe. We are ignoring the warnings of hundreds of scientists, and we are doing so at our peril. Of particular concern to me is the effect that this bill will have on EPA's greenhouse gas reporting requirements. Countless climate scientists and authoritative scientific organizations have concluded that climate change is occurring, that it's caused by human activities, and it poses significant risks for humans and the environment. These premier experts agree that the need for urgent action to reduce our greenhouse gas is indisputable, and the first step to successfully doing so is to have accurate measurements, consistent reporting, and a publicly available database of our emission levels. I worked closely with the EPA to design a greenhouse gas registry in a responsible fashion. If we are ever going to reduce this pollution, we need to know where it's coming from and how much. However, if this bill advances, efforts to collect this greenhouse gas data will be jeopardized. Mr. Chairman, I urge you to reconsider the repeal of this requirement and the bill as a whole. The minority stands willing to work with you to address greenhouse gas emissions in a responsible fashion that is cost-effective and truly protects American jobs now and into the future. Mr. Chairman, I also want to register my strong opposition to H.J. Res. 37, a resolution disapproving the rules submitted by the FCC on the matter of preserving the open Internet and broadband industry practices. Late last year, the FCC adopted its Open Internet Order to provide greater clarity and certainty regarding the continued freedom and openness of the Internet. FCC's effort, in my opinion, was quite moderate around net neutrality. These rules do reflect a spirit of compromise and will ensure Internet access that is transparent and that broadband providers cannot block lawful content. We all understand the importance of high-speed internet access, and I believe the principle that the internet must remain open to all and guarantee all Americans equal access is an extension of our country's founding belief in equality, opportunity, and educational access for all. Mr. Chairman, our committee should shelve this bill and should be instead working to make an open internet accessible and a reality for all Americans. I strongly oppose both of these bills, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Chair would recognize for an opening statement, 2 minutes, Dr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding the markup. I'm grateful that Chairman Walden's HRES 37, a resolution of disapproval to block the Federal Communications Commission's net neutrality order from going into effect. I've consistently opposed the FCC's power grab to regulate the Internet, and I look forward to supporting this committee's passage of the resolution. Today also, this committee takes the first of many steps to stop the EPA from further destroying the economy. Today we are doing the people's business. 2 years ago, this committee passed, late in the night, the Waxman-Markey bill that subsequently went to the floor and late in the night passed the House of Representatives. The American people watched what we did on those 2 days with absolute horror, and in November of this year, they came to the polls in droves to tell us, do not do this again. Cap and trade in whatever form should not be the law of the land in this country. But let's be clear about the record up to this point. The endangerment finding of the Environmental Protection Agency wasn't some reasoned science-based document concluded after considering a wide range of scientific findings. It was a political determination. President Obama campaigned on the issue when he ran for president. Does anyone in this room believe that he wouldn't have his EPA declare this endangerment finding? This was baked in the cake before this president was ever sworn in, before Lisa Jackson ever became the administrator at EPA. So, of course, it is her opinion that this is the correct position for her to take. As with many of this president's policies, started in 2009, were firmly rejected in November of 2010. Congress is the proper place to determine which air pollutants should and should not be regulated under the Clean Air Act. Congress has consistently, in a bipartisan way, determined which pollutants should be included. With this bill, we see Congress determining, again in a bipartisan way, which pollutants should and should not be regulated. I'll yield back my time.
Thank you. Chair would recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Matsui, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I am strongly opposed to both legislative proposals before us today. First, H.R. 910 is misleading in name and facts. It aims to unravel our nation's gains in the clean energy economy and independence from foreign sources of oil. The situation in Libya is just another reminder of our nation's need to take real steps to move our economy away from foreign sources of oil toward having in place a national energy standard and American-made clean energy technologies. The bill would prohibit the EPA from establishing further emission standards for automobiles, which will stifle American clean energy technologies being adopted by U.S. auto manufacturers. This will discourage job creation. The bill also endangers our nation's health. The bill goes further by repealing the EPA's endangerment finding. This bill is not good for our economy, our country, and I urge my colleagues to oppose this bill. The Congressional Review Act is another bill that discourages innovation, investment, and American jobs in the broadband technology sectors of our economy. This resolution is loaded with unintended consequences that frankly are not good for broadband providers, small business owners, and entrepreneurs, innovators, and most importantly, job creation. Overturning the open internet order will limit the FCC's ability to protect consumers. Such things as basic measures as transparency and non-blocking will be prohibited. I strongly urge a no vote on both of these proposals. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Chair would recognize for an opening statement the gentleman from Georgia. 2 minutes, Dr. Gingrey.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman, I want to thank you for calling today's markup on two important pieces of legislation designed to prevent two federal independent agencies from implementing regulations that will inherently damage our economy. As a member of the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology, I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of H.J. Res. 37 because I believe that it is absolutely necessary that we invoke the Congressional Review Act to nullify the implementation of net neutrality because it will negatively impact our economy. It is time that we rein in the FCC under its current leadership and ensure the continued growth of the Internet without the handcuffs of net neutrality. Mr. Chairman, I'm also proud co-sponsor of your bill, H.R. 910, the Energy Tax Prevention Act. This important legislation will put a stop to the EPA's attempt to overstep its regulatory bounds by preventing the implementation of climate change regulations through the Clean Air Act. This was not the intention of this statute, and H.R. 910 provides the necessary clarification to limit the powers of the EPA. Mr. Chairman, I believe that both pieces of legislation under consideration of this markup are thoughtful and they help put a stop to the overreaching nature of independent agencies. I ask all of my colleagues to support both of these bills, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Chair would recognize the gentlelady from the Virgin Islands, Mrs. Christensen, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm extremely pleased to be back on this committee, but not at all about what's happening here today. The legislation we are considering today are two of the most regressive I've seen in what is a very regressive environment. Nothing passed since the beginning of this Congress has created jobs or helped struggling homeowners, things we must do to revive our economy. In fact, jobs have been threatened or lost, and last week we made it harder for those who need help to keep a roof over their family's head. In the case of House Joint Resolution 37, it not only would stifle innovation, but it is anti-small business and anti-consumer. And because it would bring uncertainty back into the telecommunications marketplace, it is also anti-investment and anti-job creation. All of the industry's leaders, as well as consumer groups and those for whom an open internet provided opportunities to start a business and grow, support the FCC rule. The principles embodied therein have guided the Commission for years now, and this resolution, if passed, would set the industry back decades with no benefit whatsoever and without the possibility of rectifying the damage it would do. H.R. 910 is worse. It would reverse the public health gains made since the enactment of the Clean Air Act. Instead of continuing and increasing the good that act did in saving lives, reducing respiratory diseases, and increasing productivity, repealing the EPA determination on greenhouse gases and the authority to regulate them would allow known injurious gases to be in the air that we and our children breathe. Given the clear science, that is irresponsible. Because of the responsible and balanced stewardship of the EPA, which continues under Administrator Jackson, just as has been demonstrated since the passage of the Clean Air Act, we can expect that in addition to the health benefits, the kind of economy we want would grow and jobs would be created with these sound and needed regulations in place. The resolution is anti-science, anti-public health, and anti-public welfare. Instead of fulfilling the vision of President Obama, passage of these bills will not win the future. They threaten to lose it for this and future generations. I oppose both bills and urge my colleagues to vote no. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Chair would recognize the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you calling this hearing, and I really appreciate you bringing these two pieces of legislation forward that are very important to put some certainty back into our marketplace and help us preserve some of the job losses that we've been experiencing, as well as the high gas prices that we're paying. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of both bills, starting with H.R. 910, the Energy Tax Prevention Act. Of course, when you look at what EPA tried to do, and as well as what the President tried to do in the last Congress with a cap-and-trade energy tax, the President was proclaiming over the last 2 years that a cap-and-trade energy tax would, in fact, increase energy prices for families, what they pay for their household electricity rates. I think the President's quote was that their rates would skyrocket. Well, I don't think people want their electricity rates to skyrocket under cap-and-trade. It's one of the reasons why the bill died. But along comes the EPA and basically says that they're going to try to ram it through anyway. In fact, the EPA administrator actually bragged that a regulation through EPA, like greenhouse gases, would actually be more costly than cap and trade. So I think it's important that we pass this Energy Tax Prevention Act, because we had chemical refineries, oil refineries, that testified that under this regulation by EPA, if we don't stop it, that gas prices would go even higher. How much higher do they want gas prices to go before they finally get the message that the American people are tired of running jobs out of our country and tired of raising gas prices because of these radical regulations? Finally, H.J. Res. 37 will prevent this net neutrality ruling that's coming along by the FCC. And of course, if you look at one of the few industries in our economy that's actually growing right now, it's the technology sector, the internet. The innovators that are out there are innovating, and all the wonderful things we've seen from the technologies that we can all use on a daily basis that improve our lives and efficiency, all that happened without net neutrality. So here comes Washington bureaucrats saying, hey, we're going to fix the internet. I think most people back home would say, thank you, but no thanks. Please don't do any more damage than you're doing. Don't run more jobs out of our country. I think if you look, a Harvard dropout has a much better ability to innovate using the internet than a radical Washington bureaucrat. We need to prevent this net neutrality. In fact, even some of the supporters of the bill sat there at this table just last week and said they reluctantly supported the bill because they were presented, or the net neutrality ruling, because they were presented with a choice between bad and worse. That's not what America's all about. It's not telling an industry that you're doing well, you're growing jobs, so the government's going to come along and shut you down and regulate you out of business. We should be about growing jobs. We should be about lowering gas prices. These two bills accomplish that, at least set the stage to finally start reversing some of these radical policies. I hope they both pass, and I thank the chairman for bringing them forward, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Chairman yields back. The chair would recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Capps, for an opening statement for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Frankly, I'm disappointed we're here today, still on course to push through this committee legislation that has little or no chance of becoming law. The public wants us to be focused on job creation. But apparently the leadership of the House and this committee aren't listening. They've focused on two bills that will not create a single job, not one. In fact, these irresponsible bills attack the federal government's ability to do its job, protect consumers and the public's health. H.R. 910 jeopardizes the health of American families. It strikes at the heart of the Clean Air Act and rejects the overwhelming scientific consensus agreed to even by George W. Bush's EPA, that carbon pollution threatens our national security, our economy, and the environment. Since 1970, the Clean Air Act has been instrumental in protecting the health of our communities and our families. It's prevented over 400,000 premature deaths and hundreds of millions of cases of respiratory and cardiovascular disease. It's done so at much lower cost than skeptics predicted. A recent EPA analysis has shown that for every dollar invested in implementing the Clean Air Act, the U.S. economy has enjoyed $30 in benefits. Mr. Chairman, Americans strongly support the efforts of the EPA to protect them from the impacts of unchecked pollution. Rather than delivering the protections the public would like to see, H.R. 910 would handcuff the EPA from implementing measured, common-sense standards to begin addressing the public health concerns of carbon pollution, and it would hobble American efforts to compete in the global energy marketplace. Similarly, H.J. Res. 37 would block the FCC's carefully crafted open Internet consumer protection rules. The FCC took this step to ensure that all Americans can fully utilize the economic, civil, and educational benefits of the Internet. Mr. Chairman, could I ask for an additional 2 minutes?
Without
to complete my
objection.
remarks? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But the FCC also adopted this rule to spur technological innovation and economic growth, and to bring more certainty to the marketplace. That's why a diverse group of organizations and companies are opposing the plan to stop the FCC's light touch rules. Mr. Chairman, we should be having a meaningful debate on this issue. Instead, you've chosen a fast-track measure that bars amendments, like making sure that the ISPs can't block access to legal websites, something almost everyone agrees to is a good idea. And America's global competitors in telecommunications, just like clean energy, these folks will pass us by. We know what works in America, preserving an innovation-friendly environment so we can continue to be the hub for Internet-based advances, allowing for sensible network management, and above all, protecting consumers and businesses' access to the Internet services. That's what the FCC's open Internet rules do. But all of that would be thrown out with this irresponsible resolution. So, Mr. Chairman, this committee has a choice. We can either tackle what the American public wants us to do, which is to create jobs, or we can stop the EPA and the FCC from doing their jobs. Stopping the EPA from doing its job now means more Americans will suffer ill health, not fewer. It means more clean energy jobs outsourced overseas and fewer American jobs here at home, and more American dollars spent keeping us addicted to foreign oil. Stopping the FCC rules means we'll fall behind our competitors, not out-innovate them. It means more confusion in this crucial job-creating industry, not less. And fewer Americans would have access to the benefits of broadband internet. Mr. Chairman, the choice here is clear. Oppose H.R. 910, H.J. Res. 37. I thank you for the additional time, and I yield back.
Chair would recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Latta, for an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this markup of the Energy Tax Prevention Act and the resolution of disapproval for the FCC's net neutrality rules. I'm a co-sponsor of both pieces of legislation because it is Congress' prerogative to stop agencies from unilaterally making rules that will harm our nation's economy. Not only are the EPA greenhouse gas regulation and the FCC's net neutrality rules bad policy, I do not believe that either agencies possess the authority under current law to put these rules into effect. Regulations stifle small businesses, whether they are from the EPA, the FCC, or any other countless regulatory agencies. And I hear these stories every day from small businesses and factories from across my district in northern Ohio. We need to be clear that the Energy Tax Prevention Act is not about science, it's about jobs, and it's about affordable energy prices. We promised the American people we'd focus on jobs and the economy, and that's what I intend to do. America's factories need baseload capacity to turn on their presses and machines every day. We can't afford more jobs-killing regulations to prevent Americans going back to work. I commend the Chairman Upton and Chairman Walden for introducing these bills, and I look forward to making them law and returning to the American people the freedom they need to create jobs and get the economy back on track. And as I asked my businesses last year in my district, I said, if you could give me one sentence to take back to Washington, what it would be. And one gentleman did it in one sentence. He said, tell Washington to quit killing the entrepreneur. And I believe that with these pieces of legislation, we're going to help these businesses get people back to work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you. Chair would recognize Mr. Harper from Mississippi for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I thank you for holding this full committee markup of H.R. 910 and H.J. Res. 37. After opposing the cap-and-trade bill passed by the House last Congress, I'm excited to express my support today for H.R. 910, which would prevent the Environmental Protection Agency from pushing its own cap-and-trade agenda. I believe that the 3 separate hearings that we've already held on the EPA's regulations and the effect they would have on increasing the price at the gas pump and raising utility rates across the country have certainly provided the members of this committee with the information needed to support H.R. 910. I hope that my colleagues will join me in supporting H.R. 910 and H.J. Res. 37 in an effort to prevent a power grab by the EPA and the FCC. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yield back. I would recognize the gentleman from New Jersey for an opening statement, Mr. Lance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regarding the difference between fact and myth, scientific debate addresses questions about global warming. It is not necessary to be skeptical of a climate change agenda to be a skeptic of EPA's regulatory agenda. It is also true that EPA's regulations put American energy production and manufacturing at a competitive disadvantage. Industrial competitors like China have no intention of burdening their industries with these kinds of regulations, and for example, China already consumes 3 times as much coal as the United States. By one estimate, EPA's rules would destroy up to 1.4 million American jobs by 2014. This is largely because our jobs will be outsourced to nations without the same costly regulatory burdens. I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair will yield to the gentlelady from Tennessee who's Volunteers are in trouble come Friday at 12:40 to the Wolverines, but we might be talking on the side about that later on.
I think that you're going to see the Vols rise to the occasion.
We will see.
Bless those little Wolverines' heart, Mr. Chairman.
We ain't so little. We'll see.
Well, thank you. And I will have to tell you, just as I will be happy to cheer for our UT Vols, I am pleased that we are here because we're doing the right thing for the American people. I've been holding job creator listening sessions across my district. And one of the things that my employers repeatedly say is Washington has not been listening to us. And the overreach of government, the regulations that are coming in reams, just reams and reams of regulation. And the uncertainty that is brought to bear on business by this is something that is not sustainable. And our employers in this country know it. They have wanted to see us take a different path to put our nation back on a jobs growth agenda and towards some economic stability. And I am pleased that we have both of these pieces of legislation because I'm hearing about both of these issues in my district. First, I'll talk about H.R. 910. It is very similar, and I have had a bill, H.R. 97, the Free Industry Act, which addresses the overreach of the EPA. All of our small business manufacturers, our small business owners are telling us the EPA is so difficult to deal with, and repeatedly they are trying to enact cap-and-trade rules and regulations without coming to Congress. This bill addresses that core problem. Our employers are going to be pleased that we are taking action and standing with them on a jobs growth agenda. H.R. 37, dealing with net neutrality, the resolution of disapproval. I commend Chairman Walden for the work that he has done on this. Basically, net neutrality would be the fairness doctrine for the Internet. It is imperative that we rein the FCC in. They have definitely overstepped their bounds. That order, the net neutrality order, paragraph 84, that would require our innovators to go seek permission from the FCC is an out-of-control overreach by a federal agency that does not know where their authority stops. I commend you. I yield back.
Chair would recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Olson, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership in bringing these two bills forward. Today, our committee is taking an important step in reining in an agency that has moved without congressional approval to regulate greenhouse gases, jeopardizing our country's energy producers, our consumers, and the American economy. Let's be clear. Regulation of greenhouse gases is simply another energy tax. The Clean Air Act was never intended to regulate GHGs. Only Congress has the constitutional authority to make the CAA, to amend the CAA, make changes to it, not the EPA. By passing H.R. 910, we take a big step forward in stopping the EPA's overreach and providing the private sector the certainty it needs to help create jobs and get our economy back on track. I'm also proud to support H.J. Res. 37. Chairman Walden's bill nullifying the FCC's attempt to circumvent Congress and regulate the Internet through the back door. Thank you. I look forward to this markup so we can get America rolling again. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair would recognize the gentleman from West Virginia for an opening statement, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the 30,000 steel workers who once worked in the upper Ohio Valley, those belching, smoking smokestacks that were denigrated a few minutes ago by some folks on the other side of the aisle, those smokestacks represented jobs and security for their families. We have the opportunity in this Congress to reverse those threats to the jobs posed by the EPA and to listen to the hundreds, if not thousands, of scientific minds that disagree with the EPA. Just last week, we had the Professor Emeritus, Dr. Donald Roberts, testified just before this committee that the EPA's greenhouse gas regulations would be economically disastrous to the state of West Virginia. Mr. Chairman, enough is enough. Let's approve H.R. 910, and let's begin to start restoring jobs all across America. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair will recognize the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Pompeo, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too, want to thank you, Chairman Upton, Chairman Whitfield, and Chairman Walden for bringing forth these two important bills. You know, I am happy to be part of a committee that is bravely doing the people's work, trying to stop two agencies that have overstepped their statutory authority in some of the most egregious ways. You know, these agencies are trying to regulate first the Internet, one of the most important job-creating tools of the last 50 years, and then carbon dioxide, a basic building block of our existence. And where I come from, regulating things like that is the height of arrogance, and I am glad to be part of a committee that is going to slow that down. You know, as someone who spent the last 15 years trying to create jobs in the private sector, I know that surviving ill-considered, heavy-handed, wholly ineffective regulation is an enormous challenge. These two bills are measured, effective, and modest. They are restraints on job-destroying agencies. For 75 days, I've listened to folks across the aisle talk about where's the jobs bill? Where's the jobs bill? Well, here are two. Two places where we will, when we pass these, create an environment welcoming job growth in America. I yield back the balance of my time.
No. You want me to go first? You ready now? I was going to wait for you to come. I want you to know. I got some good news for you as well, so sit right down here. Would recognize for an opening statement a gentleman from Virginia, 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the time for an opening statement. I agree with many of the things that have been said by my colleagues on this side of the aisle. And as you know, we had a conversation the other day, and I was gearing up for quite a speech. Since that time, 2 deputy sheriffs in my district were slain. 2 more are in the hospital and in very serious condition. And while I agree with everything that has been said, I am waiting on a call from the sheriff, and I am just not in a position at this moment to give an opening statement. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back his time and would yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from California, the ranking member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Mr. Waxman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, the committee begins consideration of 2 bills. Both bills are bad policy, and neither will be enacted into law. First, we will consider H.R. 910, the Upton-Inhofe bill. This legislation codifies science denial. Its premise is that climate change is a hoax and carbon emissions do not endanger health and welfare. This is dangerous legislation. Climate change is real. It is caused by pollution. It is a serious threat to our health and welfare. We need to confront these realities, not put our head in the sand like an ostrich. With oil at $100 per barrel, the Middle East is in turmoil, and nuclear reactors in Japan on the verge of meltdowns. How many wake-up calls do we need? We urgently must have a clean energy economy. We need more vehicles that run on electricity, natural gas, and renewable fuels. We need more wind and solar power, and we need more energy efficiency. But the Republican response is to know nothing, do nothing, and innovate nothing. This committee is becoming the last bastion of the old energy economy, coal, oil, and nuclear. American families count on the Environmental Protection Agency to stand up to big polluters. But this bill overrules the experts at the Environmental Protection Agency. If Upton-Inhofe is enacted, the Clean Air Act and the Environmental Protection Agency's ability to control dangerous carbon pollution will be gutted. That's why scientists and health experts like the American Lung Association are opposed to this legislation. They know this is a Polluter Protection Act. It is anti-science, anti-innovation, and anti-health. Chairman Upton told us last week that EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson said that regulation of carbon emissions would drive up gasoline prices. I asked Administrator Jackson about this on Friday. She called Chairman Upton's comments the opposite of true. She told us that regulations that reduce carbon emissions, increase vehicle efficiency, reduce our dependence on foreign oil, and save consumers money. Yet instead of promoting a clean energy future, we are pursuing this partisan bill that benefits no one except big polluters like Koch Industries. This extreme legislation won't pass in the Senate. Its chances of enactment are near zero. It is a distraction from the imperative of developing new sources of energy that will finally break our dependence on foreign oil. Today we'll also consider H.J. Res. 37, a resolution to invalidate the FCC's open Internet rules. This is also a bad bill made worse by a terrible process. Stated simply, what the majority hopes to accomplish with this bill is to give big phone and cable companies control over what websites Americans can visit, what applications they can run, and what devices they can use. Even the companies that might benefit the most from this legislation do not support it. AT&T and Comcast support the FCC's order because it provides greater certainty for investment. The high-tech industry, consumer groups, civil rights organizations, religious groups, and labor unions all say H.J. Res. 37 is a bad idea. The committee has heard from over 130 organizations urging Congress to keep the Internet open and defeat this bill. Unfortunately, none of these facts seem to matter. At the subcommittee markup of the bill, Democratic members proposed amendments to prohibit companies from blocking websites, to maintain basic consumer protection standards, and to ensure that the FCC is able to protect the public from online threats. These are not controversial ideas, and they should have bipartisan support. Yet the subcommittee chairman ruled all of our amendments out of order, denying us the right to a vote on our ideas. Chairman Upton will do the same today. Instead of wasting precious legislative time on another partisan bill that is not going to become law, we should be looking for areas in which we can accomplish something. Spectrum policy, public safety, broadband deployment, and universal service reform are all ripe for bipartisan action. Americans are tired of posturing and rhetoric. They want results. Yet all H.R. 910 and H.Res. 37 will deliver to the American public is more partisan discord. I urge my colleagues to oppose these bills, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, gentlemen. Are there other members wishing to make an opening statement? Seeing none, I would just note that pursuant to the committee rules, all members' opening statements will be made part of the record. And if no other members are in the other rooms on the outside, at this point, we will call up H.R. 910 and ask the clerk to report.
H.R. 910.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point. So ordered. And if we'll stop at that point. For the information of the members, we're now on H.R. 910. We're going to recess the committee and reconvene tomorrow at 10 o'clock. I remind members that the chair will give priority recognition to amendments offered on a bipartisan basis. I look forward to seeing everyone here tomorrow. Thank you. The committee is adjourned.